And most of all, frightful. We hope you enjoy tonight's episode of Fright Night Radio. Detroit was written by Seth Chambers, narration and sound design by Noah DeBiase, and videography by the incomparable, the mysterious P.J. Chambers.
Detroit.
The kingdom of the Father is spread out on the earth, but people do not see it. The Gospel of Thomas.
Grandpa Gabriel gathered the brood around his sick bed and said,
"It won't be much longer now."
We couldn't argue. He was very old, a lifelong smoker, and had undergone numerous bypasses over the last 2 years. Still, we loved him, and tears flowed. I took his hand, and he smiled at me. I was his only granddaughter, and we had a special relationship.
Oh, sweet Casey, don't cry. I've had a long, full life.
We started to tell him that he would be going to a better place. But he shook his head and would hear none of it.
"No,"
he said.
"I have to tell you the terrible things I've done in my life."
We said they couldn't be all that terrible, but he stopped us. We shut up and listened. They were every bit as terrible as anything we could have imagined, and then some. It took Grandpa a long time to lay it out, with him gasping for every breath. Somewhere along the line, I dropped his hand. After finishing his tale, he seemed relieved, while the rest of us sat around looking at the floor. He asked if we still thought he'd be going to some better place. But nobody had any words of comfort. 2 days later, Grandpa Gabriel died and went to Detroit. The day after the funeral, I returned to work. I did software testing, and I liked my job. Or at least couldn't complain. The company has an open office, which means no desks, but lots of big, comfy chairs, and even a couple hammocks. When I got tired, I played ping pong at one of several tables, or maybe even had a neck and shoulder rub from an on-staff masseuse. My grandfather had never seen my place of employment. He had picked me up outside the office a few times to take me to lunch or supper, but I had never invited him inside for a look around. Maybe I was ashamed of having things so good, so easy, so frivolous. My grandfather was blue-collar to the core. He and Grandma raised me and my 2 brothers after our parents died in a pileup on the Stevenson. They both went to Anaheim. Over the years, Grandpa worked as a track repairman for the 𝐥𝐤𝐤 train, a heavy equipment operator for road crews, and a factory foreman. He did real work, and he kept a roof over our heads and food on the table. And so what if he came home every day smelling like Gary, Indiana? He raised us like his own kids, and we loved him. Even after Grandma died and went to Maui, Grandpa still managed to put us all through college, mostly by kicking our asses to get scholarships. But now, suddenly I had a whole new data set to incorporate into my mental picture of him. He stayed single until he was almost 40. After working his way around the world a few times, he bought himself an Indian Scout motorcycle and crisscrossed America, frequenting whorehouses, bars, and even opium dens. He got in fights, gambled, and fell in love with a streetwalker named 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐿. Most of the time he stayed one step ahead of the law, but other times landed in jail. He raised a lot of hell. But he also worked his ass off and made his own way in the world. On the afternoon 2 days before he passed, he told us,
"I never did need much. Who needs a comfy bed when you're just gonna pass out in some pool hall anyway?
Looking around the air-conditioned place where I worked, I wondered who in the hell was I to judge. Grandpa had always lived in a different world than me, and now he was in Detroit. So what if he was a bit wild in his youth? I called my two brothers, Chad and Michael, saying we should drive over to Detroit and visit Grandpa. Their minds must have been running along the same track as mine, because it didn't take much convincing before they both agreed. The three of us visit my parents from time to time out in Anaheim. It's a relatively simple process. Before our first visit, we had to meet with a sad-faced counselor who spoke in a voice dripping with artificial sorrow and concern.
Death changes people,
he told us. We nodded our heads, signed the requisite papers, and got the hell out of there. Death changes people. I can't tell whether dying has changed my parents or just made them more of what they already were. But it's creepy how they ghost through their afterlives in a strange sort of stasis. Every time we visit, they're playing endless games of cribbage. Mom greets us in the standard fashion of reciting the contents of her refrigerator and insisting everybody eat. Dad asks, from behind an open newspaper, how classes are going, even years after we've all graduated university. Their bungalow remains exactly the same year after year. Dust never collects on the scads of knickknacks, the grass never grows past 2 inches in the yard, and my parents never age past 30. Chad is pushing 30 himself, and I'm not far behind, but this is never mentioned. None of us ever talk about them being dead. We sit around eating casserole and playing cribbage. When it's time for us to go, Mom sends us off with a batch of Rice Krispie treats, while Dad rumbles, "Study hard, kids." On the flight back to Chicago, my brothers and I always talk about how healthy our parents look, and how nice it is that they're doing so well. It's never until I get home that I let myself weep for all the things left unsaid, and all the life left unlived. Visiting my folks in Anaheim is simple now. No more counselors. We fill out the online form and print our visitor's passes. The whole process takes about 5 minutes. Getting a permit for Detroit was another story altogether. It took months to get all the correct paperwork filed and signed and notarized. And yes, paperwork is the correct term because nothing can be done via computer. Forms must be filled out in triplicate and snail-mailed to regional offices. Calls must be made and music must be listened to. You don't dare walk away from your phone either, because that was always when a representative came on the line and hung up if you didn't respond within a millisecond. Detroit is an embassy of hell, and hell teems with bureaucracy. Permission to visit came through on the hottest day of summer. We took my minivan. We had to fill out more forms when we stopped at the gates. Then the gates opened, and I drove through. Into Detroit at last. My brothers and I are too young to remember, but the realms used to be far-off, nebulous concepts. In fact, a lot of people even believed them to be mythical. It was big news when the realms descended to Earth. The first realm touched down in Tahiti, where it bloomed like an immense flower. Though it covered vast tracts of land, it managed to do so without displacing a single resident, or even a blade of grass. It was both there and not there. It was literally a little slice of heaven on Earth, the final stop for a select few souls. Shortly afterward, other realms established themselves upon the Earth. The heaven realms appeared mostly in the tropics, while hell infested regions of crime and despair. A lot of the realms popped up in odd neighborhoods around the globe that were less clearly defined, places like Anaheim. It took only a few visits to my deceased parents to understand what these realms were. Limbo. A new mythology arose after the realms spread out upon the earth. Unlike the old myths, these came with first-hand accounts of both the wonders of heaven and the horrors of hell. When my parents died, I had nightmares that they had gone to some horrid place. When the official email came informing me they were in Anaheim, I kept thinking they're okay. It could have been worse. But when Grandpa Gabriel went to Detroit, my inner voice had no such words of comfort. How can I describe the hell realm of Detroit? It's a sick collage of gutted warehouses, seedy brothels, torched apartments and landfills. Its color is somewhere between gray and despair. I maneuvered my minivan over 20 miles of what might loosely be termed road before arriving at the address we were given. The building looked like the unholy offspring of a no-tell-motel and a meth lab. Grandpa wasn't home, so we tracked him down at a tavern called Finnegan's. He was standing at the bar knocking back shots and didn't see us at first. He appeared to be in his early 20s, but we somehow recognized him, even if he did look younger than us. People can be any age in the realms. It all depends on how they feel and how they see themselves. Someone who looked to be about 5 was shooting darts with a withered old lady off in one corner. Chad whispered to me, "You okay, sis?" I told him I was fine, but that was a lie. It was broiling hot, and I missed my air conditioner. I felt soft and weak, and spoiled, and ashamed. I knew my chances of ending up in a place like Detroit were slim, but only because my life was cushy enough that staying out of trouble was easy. Grandpa turned from the bar like he had radar. He spotted us lurking by the door and motioned us over. We weaved between the tables of daytime drinkers.
"What brings you to Detroit?"
He said.
"You didn't all die in a house fire or something, did you?"
I told him no, that we were just visitors. He looked at us closer and said,
yeah.
"There is a subtle difference between the quick and the dead, but only the dead can see it, or so I've been told."
"Don't just stand there,"
Grandpa said.
"Better order yourselves drinks. Put it on my tab."
I didn't have the courage to order my usual appletini in this dive, so I settled for a beer instead. My brothers each ordered bourbon. My beer tasted like moose piss. I chugged it and ordered another. There were no seats at the bar, so we all stood around talking. I had a hard time reconciling this hard-drinking youngster with the man who tucked me in bed as a kid and who wept when I left for college. And yet, weirdly enough, as we all stood around bullshitting about this and that, things began to feel almost normal. That is, until Grandpa reached a critical mass of whiskey sours and shouted,
"Hey, Tommy, get your little ass over here."
Tommy was the kid I had spotted earlier, over by the dartboard. Once out of the shadows, I saw he was sporting a hand cannon that was half as long as his little leg. "What?" the boy sneered.
"Tommy, these are my grandkids."
"Good for you, Gabriel. I got myself a whole slew of grandbaby snots myself, back on the other side."
"Well, my grandkids have come all the way from Chicago to visit. Thought the least I could do was give them a bit of entertainment."
"It'll cost you a drink,"
"Deal,"
said Grandpa, stepping away from us so that he and Tommy stood facing each other. Tommy drew his gun, slowly, and took careful aim. I tried to rush over, but Chad and Michael held me back. Tommy shot my grandfather right through the gut. Grandpa fell, bleeding and cursing to the wooden floor. Time froze until he got back to his feet. He pulled the shirt away from his side to show us. Not so much as a scratch. Tommy said, "You owe me a drink, Gabe." In the dead realm of Detroit, Grandpa Gabriel had 4 Indian Scout motorcycles, replicas of the bike he owned decades ago. He took us out back of Finnegan's and showed them off to us. In the realms, you are as young or old, as rich or poor as you feel. I guess Grandpa felt pretty well off. He kicked the starter on one and it rumbled to life. He looked at us and said,
"What are you waiting for? An engraved invitation?"
I cast a nervous look at my minivan. To say it was parked in a bad neighborhood was the understatement of the century. Grandpa caught the look. A moment later, Tommy sauntered out the back door of Finnegan's. Grandpa shoved some bills in the boy's hands and asked him to keep an eye on the van. Tommy leaned against it, one hand on his pistol. I straddled one of the scouts and kicked it to life. My brothers followed suit. These bikes were like untamed beasts compared to my little pussy Vespa back home. Grandpa gave us a quick tutorial on how to shift these ancient bikes, and then we set off. We rode fast. We tore around corners, cut through abandoned warehouses, and jumped curbs to go careening down sidewalks. Pedestrians scattered, a few cursing. Grandpa roared laughter, and it wasn't long before my brothers and I joined in. Near sunset, he led us downtown, where we finally slowed. Streetwalkers waved and called him by name. He waved and called them by name right back. A sad look came and went on his face. None of these streetwalkers were Rosalie, the hooker he fell in love with so long ago. Grandpa gunned his Scout and roared off again. I twisted my throttle and caught right up. Grandpa and I raced. He had the advantage of knowing the terrain, but I held my own just fine. We left the boys in our dust. And even though this was a dead realm, I couldn't help but think this is living. I never had this much fun visiting my folks in Anaheim. I let my brothers do most of the driving back to Chicago while I stared out the window, thinking. The first thing I did back home was quit my job. The hell with comfy chairs and hammocks. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with the rest of my life, but I was pretty sure it would involve having fun and getting in trouble. I had lived my life in fear for way too long. Fear of disappointing my family. Fear of failure, but mostly fear of going someplace awful after my earthly life was over. Nothing fills you with dread like growing up with the knowledge that hell is real and damn near next door. But now I had been to hell. Or at least to Detroit, and it wasn't all that bad. In fact, much as we might have tried to deny it, my brothers and I had a blast. Plus, we came away with stories to tell in the bargain. Now it was time to take a few risks and start living like I had a pair, even if I was a girl. A month after getting back from visiting Grandpa, I landed a gig at the Leg Room. Under the stage name of Candy Sweet, I swung around a pole and shed my clothes for adoring fans. The money was good, even better than the software gig. But that was hardly the point. I was being bad and loving it. One night, my cell phone rang just as I hit the dressing room between sets. The maudlin yet slimy voice of a bureaucrat asked if he was talking to 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐿. I told him yes. "I'm afraid I have some distressing news," came that sniveling little voice. "It's about your grandfather." "What about him? The man is already dead." "Yes. Well, it seems there was an altercation of some sort, a Donnybrook or a fracas, you might say. Perhaps skirmish might be the more apt term." Damn, but I hate bureaucrats. I bit my tongue and let the weasel ramble on. "As you may know, most injuries in the realms are self-healing. Some, however, are beyond repair." Music pounded from the lounge as Kitty Cat began her dance. The dressing room buzzed with its usual beehive of activity, and yet I was suddenly very much alone. I whispered, "What happened?" "I'm afraid there is no delicate way to put this. Your grandfather was shot in the head. He died again. And I'm sorry to report, he went to New Jersey."
Thank you for tuning in to tonight's episode of Fright Night Radio. If you enjoyed our story, please give us a thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you enjoy a frightful new tale every Friday night. Pleasant dreams.